Good evening, everybody. I'm Richard Pringle. I'm your host tonight. My pleasure to welcome you here this evening to this Health and Phys Ed seminar. I understand there are about 30 live streamers out there stalking this at the moment and looking. So welcome to the live streamers as well. And there's a number of people who've registered to get the video as well. For those of you who don't know, it is National Health and Physical Education Day. And this is organised in conjunction with HPE. It's the whole idea of the day is to promote health and physical education in schools, in communities and within the curriculum. And I was pleased to learn today that there's been 55,000 school students registered in support of this day across the country, so that's fantastic. And HPE is also involved in supporting this seminar on National Health and Phys Ed Day as well. In hosting this, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're on, the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So it's fantastic looking at the video that had just been playing, showing the connection between Monash and Elizabeth Murdoch College. And clearly it's about differentiated assessment. I think it's a really important research topic. Previously, it's been relatively poorly done within health and phys ed. So assessment has tended to focus on a student's ability, and often it's judged on that student's ability, not what they've learnt during phys ed, but their motor ability that they've already come into. Yet if education reporting and assessment is based on curriculum and what somebody's learnt, and we're basing it on what somebody's already got, then we're not doing it well. So it's exciting to see the video and understand how it's working and what is actually taking place at the college there. It's my pleasure to introduce my colleague and friend, Dr. Justin O'Connor. He obviously hails from Monash University here on the peninsula. And in terms of wanting to introduce him, I checked out his bibliography online today, and it was incredibly impressive. The number of publications over the last several years, the international connections with scholars from Scotland, Europe, North America, the size of the research grants that Justin's pulling in, and the diversity of the projects that he's involved in. So he's a real mover and shaker internationally in the world of health and physical education, and I'm looking forward to hearing from him tonight. In fact, if you don't know, he's a mover and shaker in some of the pubs and bars on the peninsula with his band as well. So he's a singer, and they do fantastic versions of 80s New Zealand covers, which I always appreciate. It's also my pleasure to introduce Jess Wade. Jess was a student here 9 years ago doing the Health and Phys Ed degree, and is now Domain Leader of Health and Phys Ed, Elizabeth Murdoch, and is doing some exciting work with Justin on this project. So I'm looking forward to it. My understanding is we're going to go around 55 minutes.
Plus.
60. My understanding is around 60 minutes. And then 10 to 15 minutes questions and answers. So pass it over to you.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks for those kind words. Okay, so I guess for me, when we think about assessment, what does assessment do? We can kind of get kind of caught up in the numbers and the data and like reporting at the end of the year and giving students a grade. And for me, that's not really what we use assessment for. Assessment is much more about the learner and the learner's learning. And I think if we move away from this idea that we have to assess to put in a report or to give people a grade, then we start to really think about, well, what is our teaching doing? What's the teaching and the learning that's happening here in front of me in this class with these learners at this time? And I think for me, it sharpens the pencil a little bit about what am I going to do today and what difference am I going to make as a teacher when I work with these 25 young people in this unit called Health and Phys Ed or whatever that is. So really, assessment, I think, is a device or a tool that you use to give yourself a clear idea of what it is that you and the learners are going to work together to develop and progress in this precious time that we have with them, which is not much. And how are we going to kind of change something? I mean, learning is about change. It's about a change to long-term memory. And it's a shift. Something happens in learning, right? So we've gone from something to something. And what assessment does is it helps us think about what that might be. We might not achieve it. We might not be able to document it and report it to higher authorities, but we've actually thought through the process about what is it we're trying to do, what does it look like, and how am I going to enact that? So I think it's a really important tool to use with curriculum and pedagogy. And I think if you stick assessment in there, then you have the sort of those three things coalescing together to constantly work to do this thing we call education and learning. I'm all for having fun. I think phys ed should be fun and engaging, but at the end of the day, we're also teachers in an educational context, so we need to be a little bit accountable for the learners that come before us expecting to learn something in our class. And as Richard kind of alluded to, there are many examples where we probably can't argue that that happens too well in phys ed because we just don't think about it in those terms. So assessment is a pencil sharpening exercise, and it gets us to really think clearly about what it is we're trying to do. So it would be remiss of me if I didn't model for you the practice of assessment and give you something that I would like you to walk away with at the end of this thing that I hope reciprocates that you want to walk away with too. So I'm going to give you two versions of a learning intention that I kind of thought about for this particular workshop. One of them is this one up here, which is a describe kind of concept, and the other one's a little bit more complex, but I'll let you have a look at that explicit learning intention for this particular workshop. Have a think about it, and then maybe have a think in your head, what does that look like? What would that, manifest itself as? So when you see the word describe, what kind of things am I asking you to be able to do? What am I expecting at the end of this? This is interactive, by the way, so I'm going to ask you questions and you've got to answer.
Features of it?
Yeah, so you should be able to explain to me or describe the features of good assessment, yeah? So that's what that's kind of asking. Not overly complicated, not super sophisticated, pretty easy to implement, pretty easy for me to capture, all right? And I'll show you how I'm going to capture that in a second. The next one is a little bit different, using different language. And again, you can start to see here that maybe we're pushing towards higher order thinking. I'm asking a little bit more. But here's an option where we're going to compare and contrast some stuff about assessment. We should be able to look at one assessment piece, look at another assessment piece, and discuss the pros and cons, okay? Now, if I've set those two things as learning intentions, you would hope somewhere in this workshop we're going to describe and compare and contrast things, right? Because that's what we're trying to do. That's what our learning is going to be around, all right? Now, how will I know if you've learnt something? How will I know if you just haven't sat here for an hour and 20 minutes and completely wasted your time? How would I know that? I could use assessment, right? So for me to know where you're at now and where we're going to grow to, growth, remember, learning something is changing something. So I have to know what I'm changing or where we're changing from to where. So assessment gives me a signpost to let me know whether that's happening or I'm wasting your time completely, all right? So let me do an assessment. Now, assessment sometimes sounds like a terrible word and everyone goes, "Ooh, I hate assessment. I don't like it." But assessment doesn't have to be complex and hard and tricky and difficult. In fact, it can be quite simple and pretty basic. You notice a lot of paper on your table and a lot of, easy tools that we've got access to. So what I want you to do is you can choose, and again, I think student choice in assessment is really important. You can choose whether you want to describe what you know about the characteristics, and there is no right or wrong answer. You're just going to dump it down, a bit of a brain dump, on a piece of paper using this describe rubric thing here. Looks like this, where in the middle you write assessment and then you write as many characteristics as you can think of. If you can think of more than what's on there, add another box. There's no rules about how many ideas you can come up with. Or the compare and contrast one, you can do what we call a concept map. And a concept map is a little bit more sophisticated because it asks you not just to list independent ideas, but to draw links between ideas and start to think about how they work together. And we're starting to get that little bit of compare and contrast and higher order thinking in there. So choose between the describe or a draw your own one. Do it in one colour. There's a reason for that, which we'll come back to. Do it in one colour and just do a bit of a brain dump on a piece of paper for me. You can work with a pair, I don't really care. Off you go. I'll give you about 5 minutes. You want to swing in there, so you're not on your own. Many things as you can think of. So if you can't remember them, what are the characteristics of good assessment, effective approaches to assessment, and compare and contrast. So characteristics of good assessment. Whack them down, draw a map. Just see if we can do it in pairs. Those people at home, you can be doing the same thing.
Sure. We'll do the team. Do 2-3. Oh, no, you're going on.
You're on? 10-3? Okay.
Yeah. I was going to say with student
making
feedback,
up for
it's
ideas
like
that I
the
can
feedback from
describe.
students or the feedback from the teacher. Like, for the students. Yeah, so I think it's like teacher feedback.
So those people at home, we've got a blog page that you can follow, and if you scroll down, you'll see these activities. And we're on the first one. Don't overthink it, just crack as many things down about assessment as you can think of. Just, what is it? What does it look like? Go.
Occupational skills or knowledge.
Yeah, application of loads.
So just to keep working, don't stop, keep throwing ideas down, but just to let you know what I'm doing, to give you a bit of explicit pedagogy, a bit of metacognition, so to speak. I'm wandering around and I'm looking at what people are writing, and at the same time, I'm evaluating what people are writing, and I'm using that to inform my pedagogy, my practice. What do you know about assessment? What don't you know about assessment? What do I need to do? Can I use a constructivist approach because you've already got lots of ideas, or do I need to use a much more explicit pedagogy because you look like you're struggling with ideas? So it happens you're an advanced group. Well done.
Yeah, definitely.
It's 2 weeks out, so it's 3 days out.
Easy now.
Okay. Right. Reasonable time. Very good. Smart film? Yes.
Well, I'm going to give you another 30 seconds to finish off as many things as you can. So if you're holding something back, no wrong answers, throw it in, don't be shy. All right. Fantastic. So essentially, folks, we've just done a diagnostic assessment, if you want to think of it that way. Not overly complicated. I didn't use a computer. I didn't do a PAT test. I didn't put data into a machine. I just did a diagnostic assessment on what we kind of understand about assessment. And it's interesting because I know that there's some quite sophisticated stuff going on there. You know, I'm seeing SMART goals and I'm seeing growth, the notion of growth, which is really important. So I know that I don't really need to have to give kind of direct instruction here and kind of walk you through good assessment because you've already got a fairly good handle on it. So we can use a bit more of a constructive constructivist pedagogy here, because you come to this class with a set of ideas and expertise that I can already build on. But that may not be the case. If I'm working with a different audience with less expertise, I might have to be a bit more explicit in my pedagogy. But I'm using the assessment to inform what I do in this workshop. Does that make sense? So already we've done assessment. I've got a good idea of where you're at. What I might do with this, if you were my students, is you might, because I got you to do it in one colour, you might post that into the front of your portfolio thing, and we'll come back to it and we'll add to it in different colours as we go. So we'll build on it over time, okay? So it's pretty simple. It's not high tech, but relatively easy to do. Of course, we could have a discussion about that and unpack some of those things and talk it through, which would be great, but we don't have the luxury of time. So we're going to add to that as we go through, and we'll come back to it at the very end, and we'll do a bit of a post-assessment, surprise, surprise, where we'll see what you've picked up from the workshop. And if there's nothing added to it, I go home and rethink the workshop, okay, and rethink my practice. All right, so what is assessment? Now, you kind of already got a good handle on this, but let's just do a quick revision without spending too much time. We're gathering and analysing and reflecting on stuff, right? Stuff that informs what we're doing and why we're doing it. Not overly complicated, but it helps us to be informed and think about, well, future learning and what do we need to do next and where are we going to. So it gives us a direction, a starting point and a direction to where we're going, right? It's a really useful tool to help understand where we're at and what our learning is. If I want to explain it to you a little bit more in a bit more of a complicated term for physical education, and if we think about this, you can think about this from a motor learning perspective. So what does learning look like when I learn a skill? But it could also be, what does learning look like when I learn to effectively communicate with peers? If we think about the person who we're teaching in the middle there, that's the learner, that's the individual. They come to the task with a whole set of characteristics and constraints and predetermined kind of ideas and motivations and sociocultural histories. They come to the class and they've got their educational backpack on, okay? So they've arrived with that backpack on. We give them a task to do, and the task is usually determined by the curriculum document, which kind of tells us what we need to teach. It's a document that's put together by the community that say, for phys ed, we think these are the most important things kids should learn in PE, right? But it's a pretty open-ended document, and it can be anchored into your particular context, in your particular school, and your particular students. In fact, I would say to you, be really careful about anchoring the learning in the context of those kids' lives, right? No point doing volleyball if there's not a volleyball competition in sight, right, anywhere around the place. So anchor it to the place. And then we've got the sort of the environmental context in which the learning will occur. So where is this going to occur? What equipment we've got? What space have we got? What's the place around us? Where are they going to practice it? Are they going to practice it before school, after school, at lunchtime, with their friends? What's the kind of environmental context of it? And really what we're doing is we're saying for each of these things here, social, emotional, technical, tactical, embodied, physical, all these boundaries that exist around this individual, what we're trying to do is shift the edges or push the boundaries out further, okay? So we're giving them a task to do in an environment with their individual constraints, and each child will have a unique boundary around them that we're trying to push further out. And when we push those boundaries out, we're extending them, we're developing, something's changing, and that's what we might think of as learning, all right? The cognitivists would call that a change in long-term memory. So there's been something that's actually changed. The schemata have been formed, we've changed something in their long-term memory. A motor learning context is talking about self-organising, but we can do it with greater levels of constraints and things to deal with, so we're more effective and efficient. So if that's learning, if learning is about changing the boundaries, how do we know if learning's occurred? How are we going to know if someone's learnt something? What would we need to know?
Starting point.
Yeah, we'd have to know roughly where their boundaries were at the start, okay? So in order to understand if something's been learnt, we need to understand where they started from, okay? What are their current borders or boundaries that they're operating on, and how do we push them and extend them, okay? This is also relevant when you think of zone of proximal development or edge of chaos, or that place where that uncomfortable space. So you think about that as well. That's kind of what we're kind of zooming in on, if that makes sense. All right, what do we teach? Again, the curriculum sort of dictates to us to an extent, but we do have a lot to say. These are pretty open-ended things. And one thing I will point out to you is that in the new curriculum, notice there's not a heck of a lot to do with the kind of technical stuff. Use feedback to improve body control coordination. Look at all the stuff related to the social context, right? Practice and apply personal social skills when undertaking a range of roles. So that means we've got to have students in roles, doing social stuff, yeah, communicating effectively. Participate positively in groups and teams. So they're going to have to do some negotiation and some encouragement and support. Examine the benefits of individuals and communities that value diversity and promote inclusivity. They're going to have to be things that we think about when it comes to assessment, right? How are we going to assess that? So all of a sudden, this curriculum now opens away from being technically proficient in a front foot cover drive to suddenly being able to communicate with interpersonal skills in a positive, supportive environment. You can see a shift in focus and emphasis, and we have to catch up with our assessment, because I think otherwise we'll be assessing things that aren't overly relevant to that curriculum. And the other thing I would say to you, whilst the curriculum at one end is what we're trying to, the community says we should be teaching in HPE with your professional interpretation and input, we've also got to consider the learner. And every one of the learners we have in that class of 25 over here, they're in a particular context, and each of those learners brings with them another set of complex interrelated factors that contribute to the milieu of who they are and shape their boundaries. So some of these kids are going to have lifelong experiences from when they were 4 years old, they've been playing basketball. They're going to be super good at doing a layup in basketball, right? And there's other kids who would not have seen a basketball and don't even know how to bounce the thing, right? So we're going to ask both of those to do the one assessment rubric. And if that's a technical rubric that judges them on their ability to get the ball in the hoop, well, we've already set up a group for failure. We've already set up a group for success. And they haven't done anything yet, right? Can you see how that is something we have to consider when we consider how we're going to see if this kid has learnt something? If we don't take that into account, we're kind of missing the point. So that means our assessment has to be wide enough and flexible enough to capture the edges of every one of our learners who are unique and different, and bring with them their own set of boundaries across the technical, the tactical, the social, the emotional, all of those things. So this green child here has a particular boundary that's different to this yellow child when it comes to their social competence, right? One is confident and can communicate effectively and has got positive self-esteem. Another one is shy and quiet and doesn't feel comfortable talking in front of large groups. Yet we're going to somehow assess them on this thing called interpersonal skills. So how are we going to do that? It's quite tricky. So again, the aim is to see where their boundaries are and see if they're shifting, and is it working, or is learning happening, and do we make a difference? And more importantly, that they understand what they're doing and how they can take control of that. So to put it together, curriculum's what we're teaching. That's the kind of big picture stuff. And again, it's not prescriptive, it's pretty open-ended. You're the ones who interpret and fill in the scaffold. The pedagogy is how we teach. That's super important. And we've got a range of different ways we can go about that. Some of it's going to be explicit, some of it's going to be student-centred and discovery, but probably more likely in the middle. We need to know where the students are at in relation to their boundaries. And reporting, I don't really care too much about the kind of the big data sets that we build and report back and think about NAPLAN. I think phys ed is quarantined from that somewhat. We're kind of lucky we are. Imagine having to report on fitness or motor skills. It would just be, I think it'd be quite cruel. So I think we're lucky that we don't have to do that high level, NAPLAN kind of hoopla. And yet we can really make it about that particular learner and their particular learning and their particular objectives and their goals, which I think is far more, a much nicer way of doing education. So what I want you to do, there's a rubric on your table, and it's a basketball rubric. It's on the A3 piece of paper. Grab that rubric, and I want you just to read it, and I want you to write all over it, annotate it, write on it what's good, what's bad, what do you like, what don't you like. Scribble on it, circle things, highlight bits. Tell me what you like or do not like about that particular assessment rubric. Again, those people at home, there should be a link to that where you can go in and have a look. So start critiquing that. Okay, folks, I'm seeing some good work. So this is what I threw up there, but it was by no means exhaustive. So for me, the first problem is it was summative. So it told me nothing about the learning. And as Richard said earlier, the kids who walk into that unit, before you'd even bounce the ball, you already knew who was going to get a HD and you already knew who was going to pass or fail. Because they come to the class already with their motor skills developed and learnt, and then what they do in your class may or may not improve it, and you'll never know because it's summative, right? So summative assessment on its own will tell you nothing about learning because you don't have any kind of conception of where you were at beforehand, before you started this class. So who gets rewarded? Who gets rewarded in that context? Yeah, those kids who, in this case, have played basketball since they were 4, did they have to do any work for it in your class? No. So they could bum around, muck around, be annoying, tease other people, do whatever, and they're going to get a good grade no matter what. Okay, that's hardly fair. The kid who does all the work, practices, tries really hard, goes from the bottom level to the next level up, they're going to get a lousy mark anyway. So they say, well, what's the point? Why would I bother? You know? I've spent all this time practicing my dribble and my steps, but I can't get the ball to hit the backboard, so I'm going to get a 2. Why would I care? Right? I give up. It's too hard. So this assessment actually sets learners up for failure right from the get-go because it's summative, it's highly technical, and it privileges the kids who have already learnt stuff. And I noticed most of you would have picked up on that. I think it ignores the context of the wider skill. Why are we doing this? What's the so what? You know, there's no kind of so what in there. I can't dribble. Like if you couldn't dribble the ball properly, you might not even be able to get to level 1. So it automatically eliminates the people on the bottom end. So you're not being inclusive in that respect. There's a lot of negative language. I can't. I saw people highlight that. This is a very closed idea of what a layup is. It should be really open by the time you get to that point, and it should be expressive and stylish and flamboyant, and you're doing weird stuff that no one's ever seen. Look, we had a conversation down here. Steve Smith, if he was marked on this rubric, would probably get a lousy score, yet the stuff he does is amazing. So as you get more skilled, you get more varied, and you open up the possibilities for movement. You don't shut them down and close them and be really rigid. So I think we've kind of hit that. We can see why this is problematic, and if this is the practice in our schools, it's not helping learning, okay? Just to show of hands if you think this is the kind of stuff you do in your school or you've seen in your school. Oh, excellent. Oh, you guys do this still? This stuff?
Tried to, we tried
Yeah.
to, but
Yeah.
we've got 20 of stuff.
Right.
And the majority of them.
Okay. Yeah, summative at the end. Yeah, and I would say, you just put fitness testing in this basket. It's the same thing. One lot of mass fitness testing all at once, pick a random day in the year, do all the tests, go, oh, there you are. Oh, great. Where was my opportunity to improve? What? We tested you on 46 things.
We were just chatting before about where we are constrained by assessment and reporting sometimes. Like we have cycles,
yeah.
we're forced to do something.
Yeah, but I don't think you're constrained by... I don't think you're constrained...
No, only time.
Yeah, time. So... what I did at the start took 5 minutes. It'll take another 5 minutes at the end. There's 10 minutes. That's assessment. Yeah? So we need to think differently. So we need to start thinking about how do we include the edges of our learners and how do we consider that broad breadth that we get. Now I'm going to give you sort of something that's a little bit technical, but just ignore the fact it's technical. It makes a point, right? So let's have a think about, this is a PAT test that they do in maths and English, that sort of stuff, where they get them to do it online and they answer a whole bunch of multiple choice questions. Ignore that. But what I'm showing you here is that you've got students with vast variation in ability, right? So if this is increasing level of ability, increasing level of difficulty on the axis, these kids up here get all of these questions right, and these kids get the same questions wrong a lot, okay? Now, that could be the same thing in our basketball rubric, right? That's what it would look like if we did it on 50 kids. We'd find some up there that look like that. So an assessment that only ever looks here is actually going to be unhelpful for these kids and be unhelpful for these kids. These kids are going to fail it completely, these kids are going to ace it completely and no one will know anything different at the end of the unit, right? So that form of assessment, a one-size-fits-all assessment, is not helpful at showing us where kids are at. So your assessment should be able to find that middle ground between what you know and what you don't know and help you find the edges of where you're at. Okay, this is the place where learning happens. It's that edge of chaos. It's the zone of proximal development, right? That's where the learning happens. And if we can find that and get our test point, our challenge point, then we know we're in the right place and we can progress ourselves and learn from there on. Okay, so how do we do that with HPE? Here's something that I spend many hours as a PhD student looking at thousands and thousands of kids doing overarm throws. It was quite tedious. But I would test, I went through pretty much a random sample of Victoria and analysed them on video doing the overarm throw. And I found that this was an all or nothing test. Everyone got the first one. So there wasn't anyone who didn't look at the target. But if you got this one here, step towards the target with the foot opposite throw, it means you're already side on, it means you were already hip shoulder rotating, you had some sort of backswing and a follow through. You're pretty much going to unlock the rest of it. So you were either 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 or 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and there was kind of nowhere in the middle. There was nothing to really tell the learner about where I am, where am I going, how do I move forward. I'm using a motor skill example here, but you could do the same thing with other domains, right? So this thing was kind of hit and miss in terms of an assessment. It's a one-size-fits-all, and you can see, I know that happens to be rubbish because I was on the research team, but you can see even how spaced out they are. If it's going to take me from age 5 to age 9 to progress through that assessment, it's not really telling me much about my learning right here and right now. Okay, it's a long-term proposition, this. So how do we bring that into something I can use that's useful for me right now in this place and time? So I've kind of come up with a different version which I think is, you can critique it and tell me if it's rubbish, but what I've got here is a sliding scale of assessment. So think of it like this. The green goes to the yellow and then it kind of sits, whoops, wrong way. It sits like that. Does that make sense? Everyone see that? So depending upon your prior experience, you might get the advanced kind of assessment card and assess yourself on that one. It's a self-assessment tool. Or if you haven't played any throwing, fielding, striking games or any of your life, you've never seen ball, you might get this assessment tool, right? This is your starting tool. And it's not one is not better than the other. We're just different, right? That's the key message here. No one is better than the other. We're just different, okay? What I want you to do now is to go through this with the same thing we did with the basketball rubric and just write all over it. What's good, what's bad, what you like, what don't you like, okay? Keep in mind it's a self-assessment tool. On the back is an idea for assessment, but I probably wouldn't do it like this because I think it'd be too much comparison going on. So I'd split it up, but it just gives you the idea of how you might get a little bit of quant in there if you wanted to. You don't have to, right? I'd split them around the room so they went. So students would choose where they want to throw at, and then they'd see how they went. And that one they get to put the cone wherever they want. So, and this one's a roll out, pick up, piff hard. Yeah, and you'll see in the text something about the cones. You know, I still miss the target occasionally from cones 3 and 4, but I mostly throw with good force and accuracy. So have a look at the language. What do you notice is different between that rubric and the other rubric? What do you think about the kind of progression? Does it cater for everyone? Like someone who's never thrown before through to someone who's an excellent overarm thrower?
Yes. You can't just go, no. But based on...
students yesterday at the gym, to make it student ownership, student centred, I then say, what's something that on this area that you can work on? I want to work on a good position, and maybe the first time that I finish that, I'm now.
The goal wants to be progression. Yeah, that's right. Doesn't have to be. Doesn't have to be so something.
The one thing I will ask you to take your attention to is the edges. So look at the edges, go to the pink and go to the green, because that captures the potential spectrum of learners in your class. So you notice the pink becomes open-ended, negotiated, extension, and it's not finite, so it can go anywhere from that point. So the edges of that hopefully capture a wide group.
Do you also, in terms of developing these, do you have a
I didn't when I did that. It's just more to illustrate the point of a sliding assessment. So if you were on this and you got there, your goal would be to get to blue. You have to work hard for that. If you were blue, you'd have to get the pink. If you were green, you'd have to get the orange. It's going to take a while. In fact, it's probably quicker from there to there than from there to there. But the idea is I can see some forward direction growth, but you would have to map that too. And all I did was pull it out of that. I use feedback too. And you notice in here, watch what others do, watch a video of my throw, seek help and listening to feedback. So I built the feedback into the assessment tool, so that's how they use the feedback to then progress to the level. So it kind of responds to that standard, but I haven't mapped them to the...
some work I've done with the school recently, like if we had 5 tiers as an example, like maybe this might be a standard working experience towards the standard, this is within the standard, this is working on the standard, so how do you look at what
you definitely could do that. I would argue that in any one grade, in any 1 year level, you're going to have kids in every one of those levels.
And we've got down here and
But what I probably wouldn't worry about too much is, doesn't matter, like if I had 5 of those, a social communication one, a motivation one, an interpersonal one, then if they were all low, I'd be worried. But if I could show a curve, here's my strengths, and really push the strengths, then I think you're onto something. Because otherwise, otherwise if I'm 5 standards below on everything, then it kind of gets a bit... But yeah, you could do that. You certainly could.
And that's why being really explicit the other one you're addressing with practice is important. Like 2 seconds worth. Part of our problem has been that we've had staff developing a learning sequence and rubric who are less than 5 years experience.
Yeah, you can apply that. Like you could use a solo taxonomy model, or you could use that and just apply that framework and go. Every assessment follows a similar framework. So think of the edges. I guess what I'm saying is go to the edges of your class and make it work for even if a kid's in a wheelchair, think of the language you're using, right? Because if they can't step forward, then don't put it in your assessment rubric. It's really important. Okay, so let's get some feedback and some comments. What was the general vibe around that kind of thing? What did you notice was different maybe? What was different? Yeah, so it was a kind of a much more, well, not deficit, right? It's not what you can't do, it's what we're trying to do, what we can do. And you notice it was a little bit soft in that, I haven't had many opportunities to throw. It's not been my thing. No one's ever spent time with me throwing, and that's okay, right? So there's no kind of judgment here about what level you are starting from. The aim here is that you do some work and you'll get better, yeah? So that's the kind of principle behind it. What else did you notice?
All the progression was achievable.
Yep. Yeah, and I don't think you're going to jump too many, to be honest. I actually think the easiest progression in this, and they're not linear, they're not like equidistant, right? So you got to be careful with that. But I think the easiest progression is from green to orange. Like that's what we call like getting the idea of the skill. That's the early phase, and that doesn't take too long. If you have 20 throws, you'll work that out. So that's probably the quickest, and then it's probably harder to get, up towards the other end. That's where you need to do your hours of practice. So you'll find I guess you'll find that I probably wouldn't have this as the only assessment, right? It'd be an option that you could choose to show growth in, right? And I think that's important. It might not be the only thing you have to be assessed on. Anything else?
It's not overly prescriptive, like in that other one we had a look at, it was talking about the
Yeah.
at the same time. Whereas here it's just saying a little stiff and chunky, a little bit more fluid.
Yeah. And this is based on ecological dynamics. So this is based on motor learning theory of self-organising system. So we're trying not to be prescriptive here because a skilled performer will solve the problem according to the task, the environment, and their body. And people have different bodies, right? Some are in a wheelchair, some are 6'3". So how do I do this thing without having to be a particular body doing a particular thing? So self-organisation is an ecological kind of framework that says we will self-organise given the opportunities, the constraints. And it kind of, like that's kind of physics, right? It's just sequential force summation is you're going to throw up further and faster if you can do that. So it's kind of the laws of physics wrapped into a body, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's a good point. You could do some quantitative stuff if you really wanted to get focused on the targets and the cones. You could put a sound meter on and see how loud it is when they hit the cone. I wouldn't bother. I think the point of this is it's something I could do relatively quickly, easy. It tells me where I'm at and it lets me know where I need to go, right? And that's the main message. And if I'm a bit wrong, does it matter? If I'm a bit out, I would pick up the kid who was blatantly trying to, game the system and I'd coach them around. But generally speaking, if it's authentic and it's real and they can see value in it, they won't try and game the system because what's the point, yeah? So the aim here would be growth. So I want to do this early, straight up. Where do you think you're at? And I might combine it with a couple of other things, like not just go straight into this. Here, Jack, you have this one because you're hopeless, and Sarah, you have this one because you're great. So you'd want to scaffold into it, and I'd probably have something else that they're thinking about as well that they can kind of emphasise. They might put 80% on this and 20% on something else, or flip it, right? Notice too, it tells me what I can do to get better. It's not just a test, it's a signpost, it's a guide. It gives me information that I can use. So those things I think are important. The personal narrative is in there. Me, my, it's kind of personal, it's not, external. I would work with your learners. Like if you have to think about the edges of your class. Like if this language is too complicated for your learners, change it. If you've got a student in a wheelchair, make sure you don't mention stepping forward or anything like that, right? So change the language to suit your learners. I've done this based on a generic group of kids. Your kids might be completely different, so change the language to suit them. Make sure they better still, build it with them. Grab 5 leaders and come in and get them to help. So what does this look like? Does this make sense? Can you understand it? Are there too many? Maybe we'll get rid of one. So build it with them. I use the giant's position because that's something that I use when I teach throwing, so it kind of reinforces that, whereas you probably don't even know what that is. So it's probably weird. So have a think about the language, change the language, think about the structure, make sure you capture your audience. I think 3 is enough. If I was to give everyone all of them, it'd probably be overwhelming and it'd make me feel bad about, God, look how far away I am from the end. So that's much more within my focus zone. So think of zone of proximal development. That's where I'm roughly at. If it's too easy or I score better, then push me into the next card. And that's what you should be doing with your PAT testing anyway. You never give them the same test. And I think most importantly is if you're going to grade off this, reward effort and work. Don't reward talent and current ability, right? So grade them by how much they've progressed and get them to collect the evidence of their progression. So get them to show you video clips of where they practiced and they got better. Get them to collect the scores of when they hit the target and get them to show off the work they put in that enabled them to improve, and you become the person who goes, that was amazing, I'm so proud of you, what a great effort, and look what you've done. That's what the assessment should be about, not about judging and, or you're not at that level yet, or you haven't reached this yet. So it's about celebrating work and effort. And if we can make assessments celebrate the effort and go, look where you've come from. You've come from here and now you're here. We're going to tell your parents about this. We're going to stick it in your portfolio and we're going to show them the evidence. That's a really powerful thing to do. All right. So Jess and I are going to split up now. We're just going to take you through some other ideas for assessment because we want you to walk away from here with some things in your head. We'll get that table over there to jump over onto that table over there, and these tables to come up behind, and we'll just walk you through some of the different assessment things. I'll leave my mic on, Jeff, so people at home can hear me. I hope that doesn't annoy you too much. I'll try and not talk too loud. So if everyone jumps over this way, I'll walk you through some of this stuff. Okay, so one of the things that I quite like using, which is really quick and dirty and you don't have to do a lot of work for, is you put your learning intention up on the board. So for example, this is a solo learning intention around what do you know about assessment, okay? So this would be for this workshop. So you've got your solo sort of things. We start up with, I know one thing, or I could tell you one thing, or I could show you one thing about this. I don't know much about it, and I can't really put it together. I can describe, sorry, I don't know much at all. I can describe one thing, I know several things. I can link those things together and tell you how they work and bounce off each other. And I could apply them in a different context, right? So this sort of solo builds that. I like it better than, what's the other one? What's Bloom's? I like it better than Bloom's because I think it gives you a bit more to see. In that sense. So if this was the start of my lesson, I might say to you, well, okay, folks, just grab a magnet, stick it on the board where you think you're at. I can take a photo of that. And then at the end of the lesson, if you want to move your magnet somewhere different, you come up, you move your magnet. I take a photo of that. I've got a pre-post data to say, did I make a difference? I don't actually know if you changed, but I can tell if I made a difference. So it's quite instant feedback. It's like the exit slip out into your class. But you can use that as evidence that you're changing something, like even if it's perceived change, that you're making a shift in understanding, right? Now, I could sample 3 or 4 kids and just go, all right, where'd you put yourself? All right, now tell me 3 things and how do they work together? And I could check if you have a good understanding of what that is, and if you don't, I would teach you what that might be. Right? So we're learning about how to assess ourselves. That's that metacognition that you have when it comes to learning. If you want to, if you can't see, come around this side, come around in here so we can see clearer. This one is, I think, a really interesting idea. So maybe I'll start with the skill one first. So striking and fielding games. Get the students to rate themselves, and then what you can do with that is they can think about, so this is striking, fielding games, how confident. I haven't had opportunities to practice hitting, blah, blah, blah. I have never had opportunity to hit with bats and balls. I'm super confident. I feel really comfortable. I can do all sorts of stuff with this. So what I would do is in the game, I'd make sure each team had a mix of these levels, and that I would have different rules for the different levels. So the purples, you get full fielding, unlimited fielding restrictions. You get the ball pitched at you that's hard. You don't get to choose the bats, the skinny one. This light, they can manipulate the fields. They have safe field zones. They can have a bigger bat. They get a slower pitch. So they're working in their zone of proximal development. It's not that you can't do it. It's just you haven't had the opportunity. You've got to create a safe environment for that. It's not about, you get a free ride because, it's about saying, look, we're all different and this is where we're at, and some of you had practice, some of you haven't, so let's have an even game. Here are the changes. So you change the constraints based on that. You could do the same with something like teamwork, leadership and communication. If I'm not very confident at talking front, it's pretty hard to say, all right, you become a leader. I might have them. So for example, the greens spend the first game partnering or modelling or watching what the purples are doing as the purples take leadership and ownership. And then in the next game, the reds can step into the purple and the greens can then start to do a bit of the red work. And by the end of it, the purples are supporting the greens to take on leadership and communication roles. So it becomes this kind of 3 rounds of reciprocal support to develop those communication skills where they've had it modelled and scaffolded for them by someone who feels confident and capable, and then they take on a mentoring role for the next 2 rounds. So does that make sense? So I'm using the assessment, self-assessment, to let the students determine how they want to work in this particular task. And if I over-assess, I'm going to have the restrictions, I'm going to struggle. They will eventually work out that I will have the best experience when I assess myself accurately. Does that make sense? So I know I'm going to have the best game when I choose the constraints that suit me. I think the best example is in invasion games. If I can choose the distance the defender is away from me, it buys me time. I don't have cognitive overload. I can do a pass that's effective, right? But if I'm highly skilled, that's actually detrimental to my performance. I want to be challenged and I want to be pushed. So I'm going to ask for full defense. So let them have that ownership. Use the assessment, and then the aim of the game is to get them to progress up. Yeah? You want the greens to become reds, the reds to become purples, and the purples to start to extend and open, right? So I think they're pretty easy to do, pretty simple things to implement. I've got it all on the blog, so don't stress too much. And I've written what the teachers might do with those as well, so you can have a look at that. I don't know if you've seen Plickers before. This one doesn't tell you who the learner is, so you don't actually understand who's doing what. If you make these, which are everywhere on the internet, and I've got a link for them, then you can use a program called Plickers, which, I'll just do an example. Come on. Yeah. Come on. No, it's not going to work. Okay, so whatever your learning intention is there, and then you hit record, and then what the computer does is it scans the Plickers and it picks up the cards. Each of those cards corresponds to a student, right? And then if I turn it that way, I'm an almost, I'm a got it, I'm a wow, right? Or if I'm answering a multiple choice question, it's a D, that's an A, that's a B, that's a C, right? And instantly it will report like that. I hit record and it will capture the data for that class. It doesn't like, by the way, don't use shiny stuff. It reflects and it doesn't like it. But let's see if it'll pick it up. It's got card 1, it's got some, and then it will give you the data and it'll send it straight to your student list, and it's recorded for prosperity, so you don't have to go and write anything down, and that instantly goes. So you could put like, I cared for others, self-assess. They come in, they put their thing where they are, you check it, you do it again next week, you do it again next week, and you're looking for growth over time, right? So you could do that every week, 5 weeks, collect the data for 5 weeks, talk to the students who have grown, reward, acknowledge that part of their assessment. The ones that have gone backwards or worse, you want to talk to them about that and think about strategies to. So very formative, very kind of practical, very easy to do. And Plickers kind of lets you capture the data. So if you like graphs and things, it's a neat little way to do it. Has anyone used that before? You've seen it before, haven't you? Yeah. You can use it to ask questions and hold up cards, but I think that's a bit tedious. This is the best way I can see it being used against the learning intention, start, finish of the class. Where do you think you're at now? Oh, I think I'm almost there. By the end of the class, yeah, I got it. You know, you can see instant change. So again, self-assessment, quite easy to do. We might flip over to the next group. Jess, are you nearly done? Just one other one. This is a little bit different. One of the things I would build into my assessments is the so what. What is it? Why am I doing this? Why would this be important to me, and who cares? So if you can't think of a reason why students would want to learn this, you might want to ask, is it worth teaching? Right? So ask yourself, what's the so what? What's the proposition here? So build that in, and this one is knowledge of tactics in invasion games. And I've written, gaining an understanding of how games work can better support students to participate in gameplay, makes playing games at school, in the park, socially or in competitive more enjoyable. Understanding will help you coach, officiate, watch games on television and understand what they're doing, right? So you can kind of create an argument why that might be cool. So you're trying to get some buy-in. Pre-assessment, what do you know about all these things? Can you tell me yes, no? What do you know? Don't stress if you can't, because it's a pre-assessment. By the end of it, we'll cover this. And then as you move through, there might be some formative assessments with the rubric. You know, where are you at now? I could describe 3 things, 4 things. You practice, you do it. And then at the end, you could have something summative where they watch some gameplay, preferably their own, and they evaluate it, having done it before in class. So you can kind of finish with that sort of summative assessment. That just gives you an idea of a whole unit form of assessment. Any questions on any of that? is it interesting or yeah?
You could also use this as like a self-assessment for students. You might have your key knowledge and key skills down the side, and they have to check off where they're at, like throughout the process of a
Beautiful.
outcome, etc. And then they get to see learning growth.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the times students will see that to that, as opposed to
where you're going. Yeah. Like I would like change your colour pens and like where were you? And I think that's super important. And that it should be theirs. Like they should own it. It's their assessment. It's not yours. It's theirs. So hand it over to them and get them used to it. And then they have that metacognition of what worked from here to here was actually did some study. So they realise the things that work and what's successful. So then they want to do more of that. I think that's really important. All right, I'll get you guys to go over there. All right, Jess, we've got to move. Go and push in, folks, and crowd around and make a move.
Justin, all these resources are available to these guys.
Yeah, I've got it all on my blog page with all the links, everything, so you'll have access.
You can take photos.
Jump over this way, folks. We're going to run out of time, as usual. All right, so. Yeah.
All right, so essentially these are all really quick assessment ideas that you could use in any of your lessons. The first one you've already had a go at, and that's that describe activity. I would usually use that at the start of the unit. What do the kids know? Maybe halfway through, different pen or a timestamp. They might just write the date on their new answers and then again at the end. Stick it in their books and they just keep referring to it. I've used this so many times at parent-teacher interviews when I'm, wanting to talk about what the kids have achieved. So that's a really, really quick activity that they can do in the middle of the gym floor. They don't need to be in a classroom or anything to have that set up. This solo activity is really, really similar, probably the next step along. Essentially, same thing, write down everything that you can think of in that topic. Then the students cut up the hexagons, start to link concepts now. As they get better along, they might put a bridge in between the ideas, and they could then justify why those concepts link as well. Again, another really quick 2-minute activity is literally no teacher prep in it. It's print the sheet and off you go, and you can get a really clear understanding about what the students know, and then if they're taking on some of the ideas and concepts that you've talked about in class as well. This next one, it looks more confusing than it is. This one intimidated me when I first saw it, when Justin presented it to me. Has anyone seen the solo assessments before? Yeah. So essentially it's moving from the students being able to list an idea to then being able to link these ideas and link them to things that are happening outside of the classroom as well. So how I would use this, or how I have used this, is I've had it up on the whiteboard. As the students have come in from getting changed, they come in and they stick a magnet as to where that they think that they're at. I would also have a couple of magnets already stuck up down at the lower end, so that the students come in and they don't think that they can't put their magnet there. It doesn't tell me, apart from if I'm watching the students obviously do it, it might not tell me where they are individually, but it can tell me if the group's progressing as well. And then at the end of the lesson, they can come grab their magnet really quickly and move it up if they feel like that they've achieved something else that lesson. Essentially, this unistructural idea is being able to know something, list something. Do you know anything about cricket? Do you know anything about invasion games? They might be able to say, yeah, I know basketball's an invasion game. Well, awesome, you're on the board. You know something about it, and you find that all students know something about a topic that you're teaching. This one is now, can you name more than one? Can you list a couple of ideas or a couple of the rules or a couple of the skills involved? Now, can you link them? Can you identify what skill you need to execute that tactic? And now it's, well, how does that then look outside my classroom or outside this particular lesson? Or I've done a really small-sided game. What does it look like in the real game? So being able to move that to sort of that real-world example. Any questions so far? I'm going really fast because Justin will yell at me again. This one.
Is that the feedback you get from this one?
Yeah. This one is probably my favourite. Our students love this one. So essentially, these boxes would be blank, or maybe you might have one or two filled in if you had a particular learning intention that you wanted the students to achieve. But they're setting their own goals. So their goal might be something really simple, I want to execute an effective pass, or it might be really something crazy like I'm going to attempt a half-court shot. So they can have a bit of fun with it as well, which is I think why they really enjoy it. And you'll see students through your lesson quickly run off. They've got their pen, they tick their box and they come back in. And at the end of the lesson they've either achieved all of their goals or at least most of their goals. The goals don't have to be, technical, tactical either. We really encourage our students to choose a goal around the social and personal capability. Have you encouraged someone today? Have you paired up with someone that you don't usually pair up with? And so they can achieve those goals as well. Then we have this one, another really quick one. I use this task as a goal setting tool and then a reflection tool at the end. This particular scenario is around their ability to work in a team. So I would like them to aim for there, so I'm telling them to aim for there because I've got high expectations about how the students are going to interrelate in our classroom. So they come in, they go, yep, I want to be here today, I'm going to aim for there. And then at the end of the lesson, come back, what did you achieve? And underneath it, I always ask them to say, well, how? How do you know? Why did you pick that box? Why didn't you pick the next box? So what explicitly did you do that session that put you at level 3, put you at level 5? Again, 2 minutes in the middle of the gym floor at the start of the end of the session. I think that's all of the really quick ones. If you want to jump around to the iPads, these ones take a little bit more time. I won't film you, I promise. So these ones take a little bit of time to set up. Once you've got the performance for these, it's really just print them out, fill out any learning intentions or whatever you want the students to achieve and run with it. Takes 2 minutes in the classroom as well, whereas this one takes a little bit longer to set up, but can still be done really quickly in the classroom. So a situation where we've used it before would be at the start and end of the unit. I would have various games, activities, whatnot going on, and then one by one the students are coming over to the iPad to complete their assessment. So this one's called Seesaw. I don't know if anyone has seen Seesaw before, but essentially, can you all sort of see it? The teacher inputs the skill or what they want the student to show. They might give them a little blurb. You can voice record. So if I was to hit play, you'd hear Justin say, what you're going to do is you're going to watch the video, then you're going to record yourself and save it. So it's a bit of an instruction. I've found that my students can't, the gym's too noisy, my students can't hear the instruction anyway, so I type it and put it in the blurb that way. Then what you're able to do is attach a YouTube clip so the students can see explicitly what that skill's meant to look like. And then the students click Add Response. You would have all of your students listed in there from the class. We would video because we're going to try and do the strike. You'd hit record and it saves to that student's platform. And as a teacher, during your planning or whatnot, you can look and see, yep, that student got it. No, that student's not standing side on. I need to have a conversation with them that next lesson. Or it could be that you put stand side on when you hit the ball in their game card for next week or whatnot. Any questions? Seesaw it's called. I'm pretty sure it's free or it's very cheap if it's not. And then if we jump around here, this is the fun one. Got to get the name right.
Don't need to say that. You're going to be on.
So this is called, these guys can be on screen. This is called BAM Display. So essentially it's just an app. It sets up 4 screens. We've set the time so that it moves every 4 seconds, but you can make it longer. It was on 2 minutes before. It films and shows you straight away into that box, and then every 4 seconds it's moving between all the different boxes. So the student can see their first attempt, they can get a quick look at what that looks like, trial it again, and now I can compare what I looked like in my first attempt to what I look like in my fourth, within the space of 30 seconds or however long that you need to set it for. This one's called BAM display. And again, it doesn't need to take away from the session that you're running. Everyone's still doing their thing. You've got games happening or whatever you've got going on in the classroom, and one by one, the student comes over and has an attempt. Yeah. Is there any questions? Nope. I haven't seen this one. No, Justin showed me this one tonight. So this is one I haven't tried. I've tried all the rest. Yeah, I'm imagining that they might get a little bit sucked in here. Yeah, it'll be good.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're back on. So we've got about 10 minutes to go, roughly 10 minutes.
All right, so I remember being you and sitting in a room with Justin and Laura, and all of these ideas came at me and a small group of PE teachers at EMC that put their hand up and said, yep, I want to try. And I also remember walking away feeling really overwhelmed, being like, I don't know what that looks like in my school. So I wanted to take this opportunity to sort of talk to you about how our trial went in our school, what worked really well, what hasn't worked so well yet, and why, and then what our next step is. So we started with having a lot of PD sessions with Monash. We worked really, really hard with Monash, and it wasn't just a one-off opportunity. We were then able to bounce ideas off each other, and I guess that's the really important thing about networking when you guys first came in the room and sitting in your small groups today, is that you've now been linked with colleagues who have obviously got a similar idea about what they want to do in assessment in health and PE. What we loved, so what took off really, really quickly, was really easy to implement, was the magnets on the board with the solo assessment. The describe activity was really, really easy, and using the iPads for a really quick snapshot of skill assessment. We've also been able to implement some form of challenge by choice, so the students choose what their next step is and how hard that they want to push themselves, and it just means that every student in our class is comfortable with what they're learning and what their next progression is. What we've struggled with was the Plickers, not because that there was anything wrong with it, just because we've rolled out quite a big change in quite a short period of time, and something had to take, and that ended up being some of those real quick assessments, and Plickers is just the next thing on our list. So it's not for any reason, it's just because we've had heaps. Our next step would be like to be using some of the iPads to assess the tactics and the decision-making process, which we haven't touched on yet. So that would be what's next for us. And it's just remembering to find time in that class to go and grab it. It's that constant reminder, because it is a massive shift in practice. Having to remember to do it all the time has been really difficult. So that's why working in the small group at EMC with the staff who were all wanting to trial it was really good, because we could check in on each other as well. Hey, how did you go today? I tried this, that didn't work. Oh, I've forgotten to do that in a little while. I'm going to have a crack at that. And it worked really well for us. Our big win, you would have heard it from the video, was student choice. Our students identified that they loved the idea that health and PE was now about what they wanted to learn, and they've got a lot out of their assessments. Our students are able to choose between 4 rubrics. It could be that they want to learn a new skill, they might want to learn more about the tactics and the rules of that sport, they might want to learn a little bit about teamwork or leadership. We ask the students to show one from each, I guess, category throughout the year. So we get them to show one sport-specific one, like a tactics or a skill, and then we ask them to show one interpersonal, social personal capability one throughout the year. And you find the kids that find sport and PE really comfortable will usually pick officiate and leadership, and the ones that are a little bit unfamiliar with the activity would pick learn new skills or teamwork. So how the students decide. It's certainly not, I just want to do that and that's it. They would work with their teachers to decide what rubric's going to be best for them. So there's a conversation across the first couple of weeks of the unit, and then the students then have to show growth in that area. We've talked about the fact that they have to show a variety of those across the year. And that they focus on health and PE skills and their social and personal skills. At the moment, the rest of their rubric's the same. So it's just one section of their rubric that's different from everyone else's, and the rest is the same. We would like to progress from there, but really small steps, I guess, in a curriculum renewal is probably why we've had the success that we've got. And you saw that our student focus groups have really highlighted that as a win for us. And then how do they demonstrate that? So again, it's not just a subjective, yep, that kid is really nice, so I'm going to give them a good grade for teamwork. We show that through conversations that we have with the students, through their diary entries and their workbooks and the describe activities that they've stuck in. They have peer-to-peer assessments who would then assess them on their skill or assess them on their teamwork with some form of justification as to why that they've given that. Self-assessments as well. The iPads give us some evidence, and obviously our GATs at the end of semester, which are a summative task, but we're sort of kept in with the restraints of reporting to an extent as well, which I'm sure most schools are. So that is, I guess, the story of Elizabeth Murdoch College and where we've gone to from there.
Right, thanks, Jess. And again, we'll have time for questions in a minute, so you can grill her then. One of the things I want to point out is this kind of notion of universal by design. I don't know if you've heard of it or not, but it's all over the web. Just type it in, you'll get heaps of stuff. But it's really about a design language. So it's about thinking about the edges of your class. And then when you write objectives and when you write assessment tasks, you're using a language that includes everyone. So that's that diverse thing. So it's about the words you choose. And the actual Australian curriculum HPE has been written using a universal by design language. So you won't find words in there that specify things like body parts that you have to use. You'll notice it's quite open-ended and it gives you a lot of scope about what you can do. So I would support that kind of design framework, and you think about using universal design principles that will help you make sure you're capturing that breadth of your classroom and getting the edges of your class. What I hope you'd be able to do is to kind of take what we've talked about today and kind of start to build your own around whatever, outcome you want to focus on, but having a think about how you're going to capture the edges of those students. So think of the student here and the student here. You can attach that to standards if you like. Again, I probably wouldn't make that necessarily too explicit with the student because I'm not sure that matters. But you might want to be thinking about, well, here's where you are and here's where you can progress to if you put in some work. I mean, at the end of the day, learning, you can't learn by doing nothing. You actually have to do something to learn. So there has to be an element of effort, okay? If you think of a motor skill, it takes quite a long time to learn a motor skill, like significant amounts of time and amounts of practice. So you have to also say, do they have the opportunities to practice? And if they don't, if they're only ever playing one game once a week in this particular context and it's not available anywhere else, it's probably unrealistic that they're actually going to learn to improve that motor skill in 30, 40 minutes of practice. So keep an awareness of what's the opportunity to practice and rehearse this, noting that some kids will have access to stuff and other kids won't. So I'd sort of preface that. And that's where I think individual choice comes into it. Like I know my circumstances and my conditions, and I know whether or not I'm going to have an opportunity to develop this, and that's where I might choose to put my eggs in the assessment basket. So that ownership, I think, is super important. All right, it'd be remiss of me if we didn't go back to where we started. So I want you to now using the same thing you used at the start, either your concept map or your describe map, just to whack down anything that you've kind of thought about. Make sure you use a different colour pen, swap pens, use a texter. Just whack down anything different that you've picked up. And if you're sitting there not writing anything, I'll get a bit stressed. Okay, so I'm seeing a few people whack extra stuff down, so good job, Jess. Well done. You've taught them something. So again, as what I might do with this is we might post that into our portfolio and say to the parents, look, you know, this is where we were and now that we know these concepts, perhaps Joe could tell you a couple, you know, and so there's that idea to sort of share and showcase what we've learnt. And I think that's where assessment is so cool, because it celebrates stuff. It celebrates what we've done, and it shows that with work and hard work and effort, hey, look what happens. We get better at stuff. Our expertise improves. Without assessment, we're just guessing, and there's no firm concrete evidence to convince kids that hard work is good. You know, we have to show them that through the metacognitive thing that's happening here is that you're showing them what works. What works for you is effort, work, practice, you know, commitment, an objective, a clear idea of what you want to do. And when you show them that, and then they improve, they go, hell, you're actually right. You know, this thing is good. It works. And I think that's super important. Without assessment, you can't do that, right? Otherwise, we're just sort of swimming in the dark. So I think that's a crucial bit. All right. Any questions before we wrap it up? Any comments, feedback, questions, anything? Throw it out there. Contentions? You want to challenge anything? Disagree? What did you like then? What would you take home? What's your one take home? Maybe on this table, give me a couple.
How quick and effective you can do assessment for a whole class. Not that it's individualised, but for a whole class, I think that is phenomenal, because it creates a growth mindset in terms of that it isn't individualised. You're all working together to move those magnets up.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome.
That's a good point. I actually do that in my classes, and I find it makes you feel good at the end of the day. You go, I was never sure if I actually made a difference, but I'll actually, look at that, I did. Or, you know, it occasionally deflates you, but most of the time you feel good. See a few magnets that don't move. One of the things you've got to say with that is you're not allowed to put them on the line. Every student just goes and puts them straight on the line because they hedge their bets. So lines are banned. Don't let them do that. That's a good point. Something on this table. Take home.
I guess because they can make individual goals, students stop comparing each other to each other. So
Correct.
Actually, I don't know, I guess support one
Yeah.
another, change their mindset about what PE is about, and not being better than somebody, but actually
Yes.
helping other people.
Good point. So it takes away that competition
Yeah.
for grades, and it puts it into, you know, I'm working on leadership. I might help you work on leadership by being nice to you today. You know, so you can kind of get that quid pro quo going on. You know, so I think that's important as well. Cool. Anything else? Jess, you got anything to add?
Nothing.
Any
No.
questions of Jess? Because she's the one who's doing this in.
How long have I been implementing this stuff? Across 18 months. It started 18 months ago when we met with Monash, and we have 24 PE teachers at our school, and 5 of us said that we wanted to try something new, and then that 5 then turned into a Year 7 team, which is where it's currently at, and then next year it's going to turn into a Year 7 and 8 team. So really small steps is why it's taken so long, but it meant that we were able to iron out some of the things that weren't working for us before getting everyone
And it
to do
wasn't stress-free.
It was not stress-free. There were honestly tears. Like, it was not stress-free.
Getting buy-in from the staff that didn't opt in at the start, are they starting to buy?
Yeah. And the reason, well, there's a few reasons why they might not have bought in at the start. We always had really great success, particularly at BCE in PE. So why change? We obviously were doing something right at the junior levels. But then when they saw the 5 of us have a bit of a crack and get some success and do things differently, and the kids were saying good things about it, then a couple more bought in, and all of a sudden we've got, you know, the majority, then it helps with that buy-in as well. We had some really great support from our leadership team though. So our principal was really keen for us to try something, even if it didn't work. And I think that helped as well, because it made it really safe and supported as well.
Any more questions for Jess?
What's your timetable like, Jess, for that year level assembly rate?
Yeah, so we go across a fortnight, and across the fortnight they have 3 prac sessions and 2 theory sessions, is how it's timetabled. And we are pretty well locked into those rooms. We have 2 indoor, we have a lot of outdoor spaces, we're super lucky with that, but we have 2 indoor spaces. So when it is winter and when it is raining, you can't really be pulling yourself out of that classroom and into the prac. But then we've tried to think about the way that we're teaching the units and trying to combine prac and theory wherever possible, so that you're not sort of teaching things separately. Obviously, there's topics that do need to be taught separately and are specific health topics, but wherever we can, we've been integrating them.
And how long are your periods for?
72 minutes.
All right, well, thanks everybody. Before we go, I've got to just thank Jess for coming in and sharing a story and helping. So I've got a little present for you.
Thank you.
There you go. I don't know what it is, but hopefully it's good. And thank you all for coming and participating. It doesn't work if you don't put in and scribble stuff and get engaged. So thank you so much for your time and effort tonight. If you do want to come back and have a chat with us, our doors are open. We're not a ivory castle that doesn't communicate with the real world. So feel free to come and talk to us. You can, I think I'm on Twitter somewhere, so follow me on Twitter. I've got a blog site where I'll put all of this stuff on with all the hyperlinks to everything. So that took me about 8 hours, so please go there and use it. And feel free to ask any questions. If people are online want to email me, just shoot me an email and I'll get back to you and answer your questions. So thank you very much for tonight. Cheers. Ta.